Ink up. Slow down. Write your rhythm with script and scribe.
Hi everyone, welcome back to Script and Scribe. I'm Kat, and today we're talking about different fountain pen filling systems, because over the last 3 years I've picked up that there are more than just, cartridges and ink converters like these, and in talking about different filling systems. And the first one that I was used to in high school was this disposable cartridges in a Rotring 900, which I really wish I had kept. I don't know where it went, but they're very expensive now to try and find again. I had these, and then when I picked up my Waterman Careen, I transitioned from using disposable ink cartridges, and I thought it wouldn't be far better for the environment if I used an ink converter. And once I started doing that, I never looked back. Now, whenever I get a pen that just has ink cartridges provided, I find the ink converter so that I can use my own bottles of ink. Yeah. Which can be messy if you're someone like me, but it really does not have to be. And I can tell you that I make a mess with the most straightforward stuff. So if you're nervous about making a mess, then you're in a good place, because you'll see that it happens to a lot of people. Now, if you've ever been nervous about filling a fountain pen, worried that you will, destroy the pen, don't worry, you're not alone. I've been there too. And lately I've been downsizing my collection of pens, because I realized that I've really gone far into collection mode. I wanted, like every size nib, every type of resin or metal, and at some point you realize what your preferences are. And I know that a lot of people say this, but surprise, surprise, I have found that I lean towards Pilot quite a lot. So I'm not going to stick just with Pilot, but I decided to downsize. And what that meant is, when I was selling off some of my pens, when I did that, a few people reached out. And when I say a few, I mean two, because majority just seemed to already be familiar with fountain pens. But two people, that was their first time using fountain pens. And I always give people an option when I'm selling a pen. Do you want me to ink it up, or do you want me to clean it out? And most people will say to you, please clean it out, because they don't want the ink to go all over during transit. But it doesn't always happen when someone fills up a pen for you. You can get the pen safely on the other side with no ink, especially when it's local. And they asked me to ink it up for them. So when the ink ran out, they were in touch to ask me how to fill it up. And of course, I did give them links to YouTube, because YouTube is fantastic for actually getting the visuals of how to fill up a pen. But it really reminded me that even the simple options of just, cartridge or ink converter can be daunting at first if you don't have someone to show you how to actually do it. So yeah, like I said, I messaged them with tips, gave them YouTube links, and a YouTube video actually helped me as well. So it is Mr. Inky Fingers, where he thought he was filling up a vacuum filler pen, realized he had the ink bottle tilted at the wrong angle, and just laughed and tried again. And that really helped me, because I know it's tempting to edit moments like that out, but he didn't. And that was such a relief to watch. It showed me that if I made a small mistake with trying to ink up a pen, I wasn't going to explode it, with the vacuum fillers, because for some reason, even though I knew logically that I would not explode a pen by doing a small thing that wasn't in the manual of how to fill it up, I was still worried. It was an irrational worry, which I think sort of stems from a kind of perfectionism, that fear that new things won't allow for user error. But really, what a ridiculous product that would be if one little thing would ruin it all. I wouldn't want to buy something so fragile. So having seen that it can handle a mind blip, I thought, you know what? Vacuum fillers do not look as complicated as they sound, and they definitely don't require perfectionism. So clearly, today isn't a fountain pen 101. I'm not an expert. I'm just an enthusiast. This is more a walkthrough from my experience, my learning curves, small disasters, and pleasant surprises. Hopefully, you'll find something useful or encouraging here, and maybe I'll tempt you to try a new filling system. That said, this channel isn't about consumerism or collecting for its own sake. I've been down that rabbit hole and I don't want to, encourage anyone to go down that. It's fun if you want to explore, and it's fun if you've got the budget, but don't overstretch your budget. If you're sticking to £1 a month or £1 a quarter or even £1 a year, do not let me tempt you. But before we start, grab a warm drink if you want one and get comfy. All right, here we go with the easiest version. So I'm going to show you some footage from before when I used my Graf and Faber Castell, because I actually tried to film this, I think it was last week, and then I had all sorts of things happening in the house and phone calls and stuff. So we'll use that footage so that I don't have to redo it, and then we'll continue. I've got this lemon and ginger because I'm not feeling 100% today and my voice is not feeling too hot. So I thought this would be a bit of a pick-me-up. But anyway, if you've grabbed your drink and got your pen or whatever you want, or you're pottering around the house, here we go. We're getting into it, starting with the most common and beginner-friendly system, which is the cartridge and the converter. So here I've got a cartridge, and these are a couple of converters, but they're not all of the converters we'll be looking at. And I will start by using my Graf von Faber Castell, because this here uses short international cartridges that simply pop straight into the pen. In fact, these are the only international cartridges I have because I don't really use cartridges anymore. I am more a converter person. But these were handy to try out because I got this pen in India Red, and I thought, because I like to match things, I didn't want to commit to getting a full bottle of Graf and Faber Castell India Red. So I tried getting the 6 cartridges, and they've lasted a long time. So I'm only getting to the last cartridge now, and I haven't actually finished the 5th cartridge, but we're going to take it out for the sake of this video so that you can experience what it's like to load a fresh cartridge, which is basically a plastic tube that's got captured doses of ink within, or measures of ink. And to break that seal that keeps everything nicely in there, you have got within the grip section of the pen, before leading into the nib unit, there is the plastic or metal spike that will pierce the cartridge seal when you push it in. And this is actually a good pen to show you with because it makes a satisfying click. Some pens you don't really hear it. So you can see that a cartridge is tidy, portable, and easy to use. It's certainly more tidy than my hands suggest because my hands already had a lot of ink on them. You just need to insert it, and then you have to wait for the ink to flow down into the nib section, and then you're ready to write. So we're going to wait for that to actually flow patiently. And the reason I don't want to teach you any sort of like hacks for making the ink flow better is because I have done that before and I've been extremely messy. So with some cheaper cartridges, the plastic feels more pliable. And so I got into a habit years ago where I used to give the cartridge a bit of a squeeze while the pen was pointing downwards, like that. While it's pointing down, I would apply the pressure and squeeze as though it were a suction ink converter. But I tried that with this Graf and Faber Castell cartridge, which is very sturdy plastic, and it simply split the cartridge sort of like more than halfway, and the ink just went everywhere. So I'm not going to do that to you by teaching you something like that. Maybe someone's got a much safer hack for getting the ink to flow down, but I think just be patient with ink cartridges. That said, I don't have the patience, and that is why I moved on to converters. Okay, so we're back, and as you can see, cartridges are a great convenience. Now we're going to look at the ink converters. So you've seen the ink converter in the Waterman Korean. That one's already all inked up. So what we'll do is we'll use this Benu, which is the Euphoria, and it is Golden Beach. And I've got an empty Schmidt converter in here, which you can see has the shape of the ink cartridge. But what we've got inside here is a piston that allows the ink to be sucked up into that tube. And of course, while the ink converter is in the pen, it creates that vacuum where this is attached to the spike within. So you can see that plastic bit. The spike is usually a plastic or a metal bit that pierces a cartridge or securely fits an ink converter opening. And then what you'd want to really have that vacuum is to submerge the nib. So this way of filling a pen is going to allow you to write a lot quicker than a cartridge. You don't have to wait for the ink to really get to the nib because the ink flows up into the nib section in the first place. So it goes through the feed and through the nib into the converter. And I'm just going to use water because I thought to myself, do you know what? I know that you guys know I'm messy, but let's try and be less messy. What you usually do is you press out all of the air, and then you've got the ability to have that vacuum that's going to pull up the ink as you twist, and the piston moves upwards. So just imagine that water is the ink, and that is how you fill your pen. So it really is that simple. This is the type of ink converter where you twist the tops. Oh, the piston goes up and down. And then there is another type of ink converter, which you'll find in a Parker pen. And rather than having that twist top that we've got in the Schmidt converter that you'll find in pens like this Benu, it is more like this. So you've got a little slider on the side there, which acts like a plunger. Also in this particular ink converter, there's a ball, and what that does is regulate the flow of your ink into your pen. So we'll force all of the air out again and do the same thing, but I'm not going to move the camera, so hopefully you can still see it if I do it this way. So what you do is you pull up the slider. There we go. So that's pulled the water up, and we're imagining that's ink. So we had a twist top, we had a plunger, and the thing to mention here is that Parker, so you can see the flow thing that I was mentioning. You can barely force this water out because of that ball, and that's quite good for regulating the ink in there. Obviously not great when you want to get the water out. You just have to make sure the ball is at the bottom there, like I did by tilting, and then you can get all of the ink out again if you need to empty it out. So what I'll mention about these is the Parker fits into Parker pens but does not fit interchangeably into other pens, whereas this Benu has got an international size thing. So let's just talk very quickly about international size cartridges and ink converters. Graf and Faber Castell uses short international cartridges like that, and that can fit into this Euphoria, for example. And the long one as well, the long international cartridges can fit. So you'll actually notice that the openings on here are very, very similar. So if I pop that in, not that I necessarily want red ink in here, but we got some India red. That is a perfect fit. And it's really handy to have a lot of Western brands that use international cartridges, whether they're a short or longer version of the cartridge or an ink converter, because that means you can just move the cartridges and the ink converters between pens, and that's really handy. You won't find that with every brand, and especially with Japanese pens, you'll find something called Proprietary cartridges and ink converters. And I'll give you an example with my Platinum pen, which is the 3776 in Laurel Green. and it has an ink converter that doesn't fit into other fountain pens, only into platinum. So we'll very carefully try not to get all of this lovely mystic forest ink on us from Endless Alchemy. You can see the opening is a lot wider than what we're looking at in terms of the International. So this cannot fit into the Benu pen, for example, and can only fit into the platinum pens. Now, the cartridge, of course, is the same. That's what the opening is going to look like. And it's really cool. They've got, rather than just the plastic seal, they've got the ball that gets pushed back when you pierce it. Anyway, so that is a platinum. And again, Sailor is the same thing. And they look different to each other. So that is a Sailor cartridge. And then we're going to open up so we get to the converter. There we go. Same principle of filling it up as, like you twist and the plunger goes up and down, but it just doesn't fit every other pen. And if you're curious, this is a Sailor 1911, and it is from the second edition of the Ninja series, and this one is the Shachihoko with the ninja on a rooftop and alongside or on top of a Shachihoko statue. But those are proprietary. And then the third that we always just used to say, this can also only be used in this brand of pen, is Pilot. But the reason I've left it for last is because that is less the case these days. So this is a Pilot cartridge, and you can see very different from the other two and from the International. So where's the International one again? So I forgot I had hidden it from myself by placing it in here. So they're very, very different. And the Pilot one is now usable in other pens, other brand pens, and that is purely because there's been a change in the copyright of Pilot's capless and decimo. I was having a bit of a mind blip and I couldn't think of the word patent. So just very quickly, every time I say copyright, I mean patent. And that's because a copyright protects original creative works like books, music, art, films, and software by giving the creator exclusive rights to reproduce, distribute, and display their work. A patent, on the other hand, protects inventions or processes such as new machines, methods, or technologies by granting the inventor exclusive rights to make, use, or sell the invention for a limited time. So in short, copyright protects expression while patent protects invention, and I mean patent here. You can now find various versions of that pen, and that also includes the filling system. And a lot of these makes have got cartridges. I've already changed that one, see? So this proves I usually prefer ink converters to cartridges, but because the capacity of the ink converters for these retractable pens is so minimal, I actually prefer refilling a Pilot cartridge and using that. But you can tell this is a Jinhao 10, and what we've got in here is actually the Pilot cartridge fitting perfectly. So it's no longer a case of saying that Pilot cartridges only fit Pilot pens. We can have a look at two different ink converters from Pilot inside my Pilot Elite 95S in burgundy with a champagne trim, and you got a mini, that's a Con 40, and you can see that it's, it twists up and down. Again, you got the little balls in there to regulate the ink flow. I haven't totally cleaned this out, but concept's the same. Get the nib in, rotate, and we'll suck up the ink. Oops. So that is a Con 40, a really short one. And then in here, we've got the Pilot Con 70, and this is another type of ink cartridge. which I almost forgot to tell you about. And then I was like, I do have one of these. So this is a push button. And what you do is the same concept of dipping the nib into the ink. But this time, instead of sliding or twisting, you're pushing this button. And initially, it will probably only fill to about that way. But if you keep pushing, it will suction it all up into the converter. So pop that one away and show you what these usually come with. Hopefully I haven't also put a cartridge in here. No, I haven't. Okay, so this is what they come with. A very short or mini capacity ink converter, which again is a twist top, but very carefully get that out. And I filled this quite well, but again, the capacity is much less than what you get with a Pilot ink cartridge. So that's why my preference is to put the cartridges into these. And I'm not sure, so we'll discover this together, whether the Jinhao 20, because these are the Jinhao 10s, and there's a newer version with a smaller bar along here, and I think it's generally just smaller and lighter, and it is called the Jinhao 20. So let's have a look if that takes Pilot cartridges. So you can see the difference physically. They're shorter, they're more slender, and that bar in the middle is a lot narrower. So will it take? I can't imagine that they would have changed this. This is looking very, very much like it will take the usual Pilot cartridge. So let's give that a go. You can see that's nicely sealed. You can see where it's going to be punctured. Hopefully you can see within the pen. So pop that in and push down. Of course, what you could do, which is probably the better thing to do, is you can pull out the entire section and push down like that. I can see that already worked. And then when you put it back, you just have to make sure that you align that section there. And yeah, it's definitely fine using a Pilot cartridge as well. Okay, so I waited a couple of minutes and let's have a look. It's a 20, Jinhao 20. And this is the other one that's using a cartridge, and this is the Jinhao 10. And I prefer that to this, which we might as well do this to show you how that builds up. And I don't feel that the capacity is ever enough of what you get in there. See, that's usually the sort of fill I get, and I just don't like that. So we looked at cartridges and we looked at the piston style converters, the slider converters, and the plunger push button one. And there's one more. There's something called the squeeze converter, which is basically the one that gave me the idea to squeeze cartridges. And I told you don't squeeze cartridges in case you split them. And I don't have one of those because they're actually my least favorite type of converter. It usually has like a soft rubber sack, and then you've got the metal tongs on the side to push the air in and out. And I had one with my Pilot Metropolitan. I'll try and get a picture up for you. But they all all of these cartridges, ink converters, all the ink converters work on the same principle of creating suction inside the chamber to draw ink in. And if your converter ever refuses to fill, no matter how many times you twist or pump, then just check that it is fully installed into the grip section, because sometimes if it's not properly in that grip section, then you might experience no vacuum, and then that's what's preventing it from filling up. And also make sure that the nib is totally submerged so that it can draw the ink up properly. And finally, make sure that the converter truly is compatible with your pen. So for example, this one looks like it would be compatible with the Parker one initially because the openings don't look too far apart, but then you notice the real differences, the depth of that opening and the width as well. And so just make sure that you're not trying to, put that into there. It's not going to create a suction. I was going to say something, and then I realized I don't want to say it. And that is, I was going to say, the amazing thing about ink converters is that it allows you to use any ink in any pen because you can just fill up straight from a bottle. But don't do that without thinking about it. So I filled up this Carco Master, which is not the gold nib one, but the gold-plated nib one. And I filled it with a pigmented ink called Chokuro from Platinum. And one thing to know about pigmented ink is that it is about that permanence, about it not coming off with water and all of that. And with that permanence, you've got a different quality of ink from your standard. The standard has got quite a neutral pH, something that's not going to affect your nibs, whereas the pigmented one is a more powerful, different sort of beast. And what that did is stripped off on the front section of this nib all of the gold plating. You can only see the gold plating in parts along the section here going towards the grip. So if you don't want to strip off different coatings on your nibs, watch what ink you put into your converters, because you might regret it. It could be, one of those black coverings that they do, or another ion plated one that Sailor does with some of their limited editions, where it's got this lovely sort of grey effect that can be stripped off by the wrong type of ink, or the wrong type of ink for the pen. So make sure that your inks and your nibs are compatible. So move on to something a little different, the Torque filler system, which I think is a little bit controversial as to whether it is a new type of filling system. It is the Endless Captiva, and I got it because it has this architect nib, and it is one of the cheapest architect nibs that I could find, because whenever you get these different types of nibs, including sometimes people make, or brands, not people, sometimes brands make a 1.1 stub more expensive than an EF, for example. But the Endless Captiva had the architect nib and a stub and everything, all for the same price. And these retail for $55, but it was on offer, so I got a 20% discount. I think in the end I got this pen for £40. And that was really good for me for an architect nib, because you can see that you get really good line variation there from the narrow and the wider section. So for me, it was less about the filling system and more about getting an affordable architect nib. But I then later saw a lot of comments about the Torque filling system, and I understand what people say about it not really being new and therefore feeling gimmicky, but I don't hate it. Endless actually started out making notebooks in India, then inks, and now these pens, and their Captiva is their first real dive into designing something that's got a bit of a twist. And you can't miss the giant dial of rotating section at the top. A lot of people feel that this is just an ink converter, although it behaves like a piston. It's pretty much an ink converter with the piston inside it. And actually, if you took the pen apart, which I haven't done before, but we'll do that today, you can see that it is a Schmidt ink converter like we had in the Benu, which is an international type of converter. And it has that system thingy that I don't know, twist up thing. I've lost words, but you know what I mean. You can see it here. They've just put this section onto the back of your converter. It's a captive ink converter in the pen. So all it does is makes it a bit shorter for you not to have to undo the barrel to access the top of an ink converter to fill up a pen. It takes out that one step because you can turn the top of the ink converter from the outside. So that's pretty much what it does. And it's the same concept. You just, pop the nib into your ink bottle and twist the top, and you'll see the piston through the window, this viewing window, moving up and down. I think the other thing to keep in mind about this is on the face of it, you kind of feel like you're getting a piston filler, but of course with it being a Schmidt International cartridge in there, you're pretty much just getting an ink converter, and piston pens usually have more of a capacity than an ink converter, depending on the size that you're going for. So like a TWSBI Eco, for example, and that takes us on to the next type of filling system, the piston. But this here is supposed to be a hybrid between an ink converter and piston filler idea in the torque system. So we go on to the piston fillers, starting with TWSBI Eco, because that is one of the most popular piston filler pens. And I've got a 1.1 stub in here. And TWSBI is really good because no matter what nib you get, the pen is always the same price. And I do like the stub, and I like the capacity. And we'll fill up this P36 from Asvine. It is the same concept as that twist top ink converter, but it's going straight into the body of your pen. And if I had been more prepared, I would have had a cloth to wipe that down. So I'm going to pause and wipe this down. Okay, so you can see the capacity in there is really good. And it was very straightforward to actually fill up. And that is certainly the appeal of a piston filler. And this is a fine nib. One thing you'll notice about my two piston pens is that they are the more affordable range, going from like £27 to £50. And I did get a discount on this, so I got that for £40. So yeah, £27 to £40. And I like that for piston fillers. And the further we get away from an ink converter, the more nervous I am about spending more money. And that is a me thing. It's definitely not a thing that anyone has to logically worry about. I also prefer to be able to see what's happening in a pen that's not an ink cartridge or an ink converter, because with the ink cartridges, I can very, very quickly undo them and have a quick look. So obviously I am a little bit of a control person. I don't want to call myself a control freak, but I like having that quick ability to, see what's going on. And I feel like if I've got an opaque piston filler, it bugs me. And although it's supposed to be not entirely opaque, I did sell my Pelikan M400, which I think a lot of people will be shocked about because Pelikan is so popular. But it was the red stripe one, and I could never tell how much I had it filled. And also I made the mistake of getting a medium nib. Now I like extra fine pens, and if I go for medium, I'm usually happy. But the Pelikan did not make me happy because it was extremely, extremely juicy. It was more juicy than my 1.1 stub, and this lays down a lot of ink, and I'm expecting that. But every time I reached for it, the Pelikan surprised me. I just couldn't wrap my head around the fact that it was just laying down so much ink every time I wrote, and I wasn't into it. So yeah, it's a higher end pen, and I had to part with it, and I prefer to use these on a regular basis. And probably one of the things that I neglected to say when I was filling this up is I always make sure that it's totally run down to the bottom, so you get as much of a fill as possible when you fill up the pen, because you don't want to have mostly air bubble in there. And pretty much like with the ink converter, I had to make sure the nib was fully submerged up to the breather hole. And, that is why I had quite a lot of ink on the grip section, because that was totally submerged. Something that was different for my pens is the Pelican came without any tools, and this P36 as well. But some of my Asvine pens, other than this P36, have come with tools to disassemble the pen. But the reason I mention this is because the TWSBI came with tools to disassemble it, and I looked this up, and TWSBI is happy for you to take your pen apart. They don't recommend you doing it regularly, but they are happy for you to, do it. To encourage you is maybe a strong word, but they recommend regular cleaning, but a deeper disassembly can be done by you by re-greasing the piston, and it's advised after prolonged use or if the mechanism becomes stiff. And I've never had to take mine apart. I've had it about 3 years now. So many piston pens and brands work the same way, giving you some stuff to take your pen apart, but others don't. And in fact, they warn that disassembly voids the warranty. So not every brand wants you to disassemble, especially the pricier brands. So just be aware of that. I've never felt confident about taking it apart anyway, but something to be aware of if you're more confident about doing that sort of thing for deeper cleaning. For me, the plunger still works perfectly, and it's been really straightforward to clean out just with water and, like sucking up the water and expelling it multiple times, just constantly flushing in and out, and that has worked. And then we go on to what I found really intimidating, which is a vacuum filler. So I'll put aside the piston fillers for now, and this is an Asvine V126, and the only vacuum filler I had first heard about was Pilot Custom 823, which people love for the ink capacity, and of course for the Pilot nib, which, Pilot makes the best nibs out there. I know I'm being biased, but it's just the way that I feel. I do love their pens, and I just, I felt like I was already being confident by getting the piston ones, and you heard my reasons for selling my M400. And although the Pilot 823 is transparent and you can see what's going on inside, I just was not confident about spending the money on a vacuum filler and then worrying that I might explode the pen. I know it's a bit, extreme to imagine that, but it felt like it was that much more technical to fill up. Anyway, it is not. It's not that technical. So we're going to do that with this. I don't know if I've got enough water in here, actually, because it does take quite a lot. So what you do is you unscrew this cap here. You can pull up this section. You can see that. Just smoothly lift the entire nib. Hopefully this goes all the way through. I'll tilt it. And you push this down. I can see little bubbles. Yeah, there we go. Little bubbles of air. We're pushing into that. And this is a normal fill. So you can see that it's not totally filled up in the pen. But I'm going to give you a link to another creator who came up with this tip, or they provide this tip. Again, I don't know. It's not in the instructions for the vacuum filler, so check whether this voids a warranty. I can't imagine that it should, but it could do. So what you're going to do is try and expel the air by pulling this back again. And now that we've got all the air out, we're going to submerge again and do another fill. So same process. And let's hope I've got enough water in there to make this a success. Yep, so you can see that's filled up a lot more now, and I'll leave it at that. But yeah, it does not explode the pen. And I'll show you that once I realized that it was that straightforward with a vacuum filler, that I got another one. A much chunkier one. It is the V800, and I do love this. And to show you where that tip came from, I will link the video for Dizzy Pen, and you can see her do a much better job of filling that. It's like a 2-minute video, but loads of people have said thank you there, because you don't want just a quarter capacity following entirely what the different manuals tell you to do. They never tell you to, go in for another bit of a refill again. And she did a really good tutorial, and that helped me figure out how to get more ink into the pen body. So that then takes us on to the discussion of ink capacity. The ones that I feel have got the best ink capacity are some of my favorite pens, and those are eyedropper pens. And my favorite eyedropper pen is the Opus 88. They come in all shapes and sizes, but you can tell that I like this model. It is the Omar. So Opus 88 Omar in the demonstrator, and I went with an opaque one, milk tea. And the reason I was happy to go with one where I can't see what's going on inside is because of the ease of access. And this one, of course, makes me the happiest because I can see everything. But this is how easy it is to have a look inside. And you can immediately see the ink level, even if it is opaque. And the way that you fill it is also extremely straightforward. So I've currently got in Wicked Witch Wiringiel and Diamine Aqua Lagoon. I might regret this because it's a color that I'm loving at the moment. We're gonna do this slight top up by putting in some extra ink. So the ink gets sucked into this little pipette, and then you transfer it into the body of the pen. So straight into the body, and then you just close that up again, and you've already topped it up. And it is that straightforward. And the bigger the body, or the space inside the body, the more ink you can have. So this is a 3 ml capacity, and if you think about it, these converters and cartridges usually have something like 0.4 ml. So if you're looking at 3 ml, you're looking at more than, I don't know how many times. Can you do the math? Anyway, you're looking at a lot. Definitely more than 5, because 5 would be 2 ml, wouldn't it? Anyway, so huge capacity, and also the valve at the top allows you to moderate the ink flow. So you can either have it coming out quite substantially, or you can give yourself a more reserved ink flow flowing to the feed and the nib. And I like that. I like the simplicity of filling it. I love the simplicity of everything. It gives you so much control. So yeah, huge fan of eyedroppers. And of course, some people like them so much that they will eyedropper pens that aren't necessarily marketed as eyedropper pens. And I've done that with this Benu, which is the pocket one, and the Pixie. So this is in, I think it was in coffee brown. I'll put it up. But anyway, I put the brown ink straight into the body. And the reason I was confident in doing that is the entire pen is all made of resin, including the threads. So the ink is not going to corrode any metal parts. I have not tried eyedroppering pens that have got metal sections because I'm just worried about the ink causing rusting. I have, however, seen people actually eyedropper some of the Jinhaos, the Didaos. This Jinhao Didao allows us to see inside properly, and you can see it uses an ink converter usually. And what people are doing is doing away with this screw-in ink converter, which is a really good mechanism. I mean, if you're ever worried about not properly having your ink converter seated, which isn't a problem I've had, but if you were concerned about that, this here always is securely connected because you got the threads on the ink converter going into the pen. But people are doing away with the ink converter and, turning this into an eyedropper, which I think is a great idea in some ways because of the capacity that body gives you. You always have to make sure that you haven't got any breather holes in the back of a pen if you're going to eyedropper it, or the ink's just going to shoot out the end. So, for example, if you ever tried to eyedropper a Pilot Kakuno, it's going to come out of there because it's got these breather holes. Make sure that it hasn't got those holes, and you can go ahead and eyedropper it. But this section would, if untreated, totally rust because you're putting liquid on metal. And what people are doing is finding a way to cover that up, I think with silicone grease or with some other hack, and filling it up. But I am not that brave. So what I restrict myself to doing is converting pens that are not marketed as eyedropper if they are entirely resin or plastic and don't have any metal bits to corrode and don't have any holes. Something else to mention about eyedropper pens is that the ones that are marketed as eyedropper tend to have what are called O-rings. I don't know if I'm going to be able to show you this with this all inked up, but I do have some spares. So one moment. So the Opus 88 Omar has these O-rings that will fit at the top of the nib as they go into the pen, and that again helps with the regulation of the flow of the ink. The other thing for me to mention for the eyedropper is if you've got a new eyedropper pen that you're inking up for the first time, you've got to be as patient as you would with a cartridge, waiting for it to have the ink flow from the body through the feed and nib before you start writing, because in this instance, again, you're not sucking the ink up through the nib unit. So you've got to wait for the ink to actually reach it because it didn't originate in that unit and go into the pen. I hope that makes sense. For me, these are fantastic if you write a lot, if you sketch frequently, or you just love seeing the ink in the body. This is a fantastic way to actually go about it, and also that valve that allows you to just adjust the flow. But I have so gotten into the ones that I was a bit wary of, like the vacuum filler, for example. And that means I'm at the stage where I've shared all the different filling systems of my pens. I'm sure that there must be other filling systems out there, but these are the ones that I have now got and am enjoying, and I'll let you know what my ranking is. Let me know in the comments if you agree with the ranking or you have very, very different thoughts on what your favorite system is. For me, the top is Eyedropper. It's the greatest simplicity for me. It is the massive ink capacity. I am happy with this 3mm from the Opus 88 Omar. It is minimal, no fuss. I love these pens. Cartridge and converter pens. Very, very straightforward, and it's what I learned with. I do prefer the converters. I will go for a converter over a cartridge very, very often, the exception being with the retractable fountain pens, because the capacity is actually better, surprisingly, with a cartridge than it is with the converters that they give you. And then for the piston and vacuum fillers, I would say that they're tied for mechanical satisfaction. They're fun to operate, generous capacity, and perfect for writing sessions. So actually I've got two pistons there, haven't I? This is more accurate. So piston and vacuum. And then last but not least, I guess maybe it is least, the torque filler from Endless Captiva. At the bottom of my list, I'd rather it were either a true piston filler or a straightforward converter instead of being this hybrid. Anyway, no matter which one you choose, the goal is the same, and that is enjoying the process, the whole start to finish experience of handwriting with a fountain pen. And that's what I had to embrace when I finally tried a vacuum filler. I had to think about it as not just my concerns about maintenance. It is also about the overall joy of a pen. And I love that magic of, filling this up now. And I also enjoyed that I found a little hack that isn't in the manual. But like I say, I always have my reservations. Do check your warranty with these sorts of things. Now, also having a reasonable price tag certainly helped me take the plunge into trying this. The V126 is under £30 on Amazon at the moment, so this was £27. So let me know your favorite filling system and pen in the comments. Are there any constructive tips you've picked up that you'd like to share with me and with others? I'm always keen to learn more. I hope you enjoyed this discussion about the different filling systems that I own. Thanks for joining me and happy writing. Take care. Bye.